There comes a time in every life, every calling, every purpose, when the world laughs. They laughed at Joseph when he dreamt of greatness, then bowed before the one they mocked. They laughed at David, a shepherd boy with a sling, then fled from the king they once scorned. They laughed at Noah building an ark in the sun, until the rain began to fall. They laughed. They laughed because they didn't see the vision. They laughed because they measured you by your beginning, not by your destiny. They saw your weakness, not your strength. They saw your now, not your becoming, but heaven knew. The one who formed you in your mother's womb had already written the victory before the battle began. He wrote the ending before the laughter started. They laughed at you. They pointed, scoffed, whispered, rolled their eyes, and dismissed you. To them, your beginning looked too small, too insignificant, too fragile to ever amount to anything. They saw your passion as delusion, your hope as naivety, your persistence as foolishness. You weren't born into greatness. You didn't have the applause, the platform, or the pedigree. All you had was a vision, a flicker in your heart, a whisper in your soul that spoke of something greater. You dared to dream while others settled. You dared to build when you had nothing in your hands but faith. And they laughed. You tried and failed. You started and stumbled. You believed and were betrayed. Each time they laughed louder. To them, your setbacks were proof that you were mistaken, that you were out of your league, that you didn't belong, that your voice didn't matter. They used your pain as punchlines. They made your struggle their spectacle. They didn't see the process. They only saw the mess. They didn't see the roots. They only saw the bare soil. They didn't see what was growing in the silence of your obedience. They mocked you not because they were strong, but because they were blind. They couldn't see the hand that was shaping you. They couldn't hear the call that was guiding you. They couldn't feel the fire that was refining you. But heaven could. Heaven saw. Heaven heard. And while they laughed, heaven was writing. While they mocked, heaven was molding. While they rejected, heaven was preparing the crown. Mockery to man is the end. But to God, it is a signpost that the promise is still alive. Every great calling is laughed at in its infancy. Noah was laughed at as he built a ship with no sea in sight. Moses was mocked for returning to Egypt without an army. David was dismissed as a boy with a harp and a sling. But the laughter did not disqualify them. It announced them. Laughter is the world's nervous response to something it doesn't understand. When people laugh at the unseen, it's often because their eyes have never been opened to the unseen realm. They live by sight. You walk by faith. You see, mockery is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your testimony. Those who laugh are merely spectators in a drama they were never meant to control. Their laughter echoes loudly, but it cannot rewrite what heaven has already declared. God does not consult the crowd before releasing his plans. He does not need permission to lift the lowly, to exalt the humble, to use the broken. The very laughter meant to break your spirit becomes the soundtrack of your breakthrough. The truth is, mockery is a mirror. It shows more about them than it does about you. It reveals fear, insecurity, limitation. People mock what threatens their comfort. They ridicule what confronts their mediocrity. Your boldness reminds them of their compromise. Your obedience shines light on their complacency. So they laugh, not because you are small, but because they feel exposed. They laugh to silence what challenges them, but the mockery only sharpens the edge of the calling. It humbles you, it tests you, it burns away pride. It teaches you to walk without applause, to believe without approval, to move without man's permission. It turns your eyes upward instead of outward. It forces you into the secret place, the place where no crowd can follow, where the voice of God is the only voice that matters. And it is in that place, hidden and laughed at, that the roots grow deep and the foundations are laid. Faith looks foolish before it proves wise. That is the paradox of the journey. When God calls, he often does so without giving explanations, without laying out the full plan, without revealing the ending. He simply says, "Go," and expects you to move, and when you do, when you step out of the boat, when you walk toward the giant, when you lift up empty hands in obedience, the world looks on and laughs to them. Your faith is absurd. It's irrational. It defies logic. It walks upstream against the current of reason. Faith sees what isn't visible. It hears what hasn't yet been spoken aloud. It believes when there's nothing to hold on to but the word of the invisible. To the mind that only knows what can be measured, faith is madness. When Abraham left his homeland not knowing where he was going, the wise ones would have called him irresponsible. When Sarah prepared a nursery while her body was still barren, the logical would have called her delusional. When Peter stepped onto the water, leaving the stability of the boat, the rational minds would have told him to sit down and be safe. But faith isn't about safety. It's about surrender. It isn't about reason. It's about revelation. It doesn't move when it all makes sense. It moves when God speaks. The beginning of faith is the beginning of ridicule, because faith disrupts what is normal. It challenges what is expected. It exposes the limitations of man's understanding. You start a business with no backing, and they call it a fantasy. You pursue a vision with no resources, and they call it a waste. You believe in healing when the doctor has given the final word, and they call it denial. But faith doesn't wait for the facts to line up. It moves before the facts change. It speaks before the atmosphere shifts. It declares rain while the sky is still clear. To build something by faith is to build in the dark. It is to construct with no blueprint but trust. It is to plant seeds with no forecast of rain. It is to walk on a path that hasn't yet appeared beneath your feet, and in that place of mystery, faith appears as foolishness. But the foolishness of faith is wisdom in disguise. Heaven's wisdom never bows to the world's logic. It doesn't follow the formulas. It disrupts them. It rewrites them. What looks like foolishness to man is often the very thing God uses to reveal his glory. Noah looked foolish for years. Abraham looked foolish for decades. Moses looked foolish speaking to a sea. Joshua looked foolish marching in circles, but the walls fell, the sea split, the child was born. The rain came, the miracle arrived, and the same faith that once looked foolish stood triumphant. What was once mocked became the proof, the evidence, the fulfillment, but only after the test, only after the laughter, only after the long nights of doubt and the silent years of waiting. This is why faith must be blind to opinion. It must be deaf to ridicule. It must be unshaken by delay. It must hold fast when there's nothing left but the word it heard at the beginning. The world honors results, but God honors the walk that happens before results. Faith is the willingness to appear wrong, the courage to be misunderstood, the strength to keep going without confirmation. And though it may look like folly in the beginning, in the end, it reveals the wisdom of the one who spoke. God writes victory in the shadows, not in the spotlight, not in the noise, not in the parade of public approval, but in the quiet places where no one is watching. It is in the unseen moments, in the lonely hours, in the hidden valleys that the greatest victories are born. The world looks for success in stages and headlines, but God forms his champions in caves and wildernesses. When nothing seems to be happening, everything is happening. When the world sees silence, heaven is scripting destiny. The absence of applause does not mean the absence of purpose. The lack of recognition does not mean lack of progress. God's pen moves quietly, but it never stops writing. Before the crown there is always a cave. David was anointed king, yet spent years hiding in shadows, misunderstood, hunted, and alone. To man, it looked like delay. To heaven, it was development. The throne was written in the shadow of rejection. Joseph's dreams were not fulfilled in his father's house, but in a prison cell where he was forgotten by man, but remembered by God. The pit, the false accusation, the chains, these were the shadows where the script of victory was etched. Jesus himself, the very Son of God, was born in a manger, raised in obscurity, and spent 30 years in silence before stepping into 3 years of public ministry. 30 years of preparation for 3 years of revelation. Heaven's mathematics is not man's. There is a pattern to the shadows. They test you. They strip you of pride. They remove every false motive. In the shadows, you learn to trust without seeing, to obey without validation, to worship without reward. You learn to love the voice of God more than the voice of men. You learn to endure in silence, to grow roots in dry ground. You learn that your identity is not built on who sees you, but on who formed you. The shadows are not your punishment. They are your preparation. They are the womb of your calling, the place where God hides you so he can shape you. The world may never applaud the quiet decisions, the private sacrifices, the unseen faithfulness, but heaven records every one, every tear cried in secret, every act of obedience when no one was watching. Every moment you chose integrity over compromise, humility over recognition, patience over promotion. God writes those moments into your story, not as footnotes, but as foundations. What he builds in public must be rooted in what was proven in private. When you feel hidden, you are not forgotten. When you feel delayed, you are not denied. When you feel unseen, you are being written into something greater. The shadows are not the end. They are the beginning. Every promise of God carries a shadow season. Every elevation is preceded by an isolation. You are not buried. You are planted. You are not abandoned. You are set apart. The script of heaven unfolds in the slow, faithful turning of unseen pages. God writes with eternity in mind. While the world celebrates the instant, God honors the enduring. He is not moved by trending moments, but by timeless obedience. In the shadows, you are being trained for a victory that cannot be taken, because it was not built on applause, but on purpose. That which is formed in darkness will shine all the brighter in the light. When the appointed time comes, what was written in silence will speak loudly. What was forged in secret will roar in public. The ink of victory is laid down long before the world ever reads the story. Destiny is hidden in rejection, not in comfort, not in applause, not in open doors, but in the moments when you are pushed aside, passed over, misunderstood, and forgotten. Rejection is not a detour from destiny. It is often the very road that leads to it. It is in rejection that character is forged. It is in rejection that dependence on God is born. It is in rejection that the layers of pride, entitlement, and self-reliance are stripped away, and what remains is pure, refined, and ready. What man calls failure, heaven often calls formation. The people who walked away, the opportunities that slipped through your fingers, the doors that never opened, those were not accidents. They were appointments with the divine. Not every no is a curse. Sometimes it is a shield. Joseph was rejected by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused and imprisoned. To the world he was forgotten, but in heaven's eyes he was in process. Every rejection was moving him closer to the palace. Every betrayal was positioning him for a greater unveiling. Without the pit, he would not have reached the throne. Without rejection, the dream would have remained a dream. It was in the place of being cast down that Joseph rose. They laughed, but heaven never did. Their laughter was loud, but heaven was silent, not because it agreed with them, but because it was working on something deeper. When they mocked you, heaven remained still, not out of neglect, but because it was orchestrating the exact moment when everything would turn. They laughed at your beginnings, but heaven saw the end. They laughed at your failure, but heaven saw your faith. They laughed when you fell, but heaven knew you would rise. Man laughs at what it doesn't understand. Heaven moves with purpose even in the face of ridicule. The laughter of people is loud in the moment, but heaven's plans are eternal. You heard the mockery, the whispers behind closed doors, the sarcasm disguised as advice. You saw the looks, felt the shame, carried the weight of being the one they counted out. But while they were measuring your worth by what they could see, heaven was writing your future by what only it could see. While they were labeling you based on your past, heaven was defining you by your calling. Heaven does not laugh at broken beginnings. Heaven does not mock mustard seed faith. Heaven does not dismiss small acts of obedience. It watches, it records, it waits for the appointed time. Heaven never needs to defend you in the moment of your humiliation. It allows the story to unfold. It allows you to walk through fire so that you come out without the smell of smoke. It allows you to be buried like a seed so you can rise in due season with fruit they never expected. While they mocked you, heaven was growing you. While they laughed, heaven was stretching your roots. While they doubted you, heaven was preparing a platform no man could build. There is something sacred in being laughed at. It connects you to the prophets, to the pioneers, to the ones who carried the flame before you. Noah was laughed at for building something no one had seen. Abraham was laughed at for believing something no one could imagine. Hannah was laughed at for praying for something that had never been. But heaven never laughed. Heaven responded, and heaven responds still. Their laughter was a reaction to what they couldn't control. They couldn't place you in their boxes. You didn't fit the mold. You didn't follow the formula, so they laughed. But heaven saw someone who would not bow to fear, someone who would not quit in silence, someone who would weep, then stand, fall, then rise, break, then build. The very fact that they laughed proves they saw something they couldn't explain, something that made them uncomfortable, and heaven does not mock what it designs. Heaven is not intimidated by laughter. It does not rush to silence critics. It lets the scene play out, because when heaven moves, no voice of mockery can stand. When heaven opens the door, no one can shut it. When heaven lifts you, no one can deny it. The laughter becomes background noise to the sound of destiny being fulfilled, and the very people who laughed will have to watch as God completes the work He began in you. They laughed, but heaven never did. They laughed at your weakness, but heaven saw your strength. They laughed at your tears, but heaven counted each one. They laughed at your process, but heaven was invested in your outcome. Their laughter was temporary. Heaven's plan was eternal, and while they were mocking the moment, heaven was writing the miracle, because heaven never laughs at faith. Heaven never laughs at obedience. Heaven never laughs at those who trust, even in the dark.